Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks a million for joining this Lunch and Learn. Today's session is on the DETAS project, which is digitalizing Erasmus traineeship application support, which is an EU-funded project that aims to increase the number of students participating in Erasmus Plus training, placements, and internship. It also improves access to resources and information for both students and university partners. It streamlines the recruitment process for students and employers, and it provides universities with innovative tools to support student participants in Erasmus Plus traineeships and internships. This project will address specific challenges for students and employers, such as pre-departure support and integrating into the local environment, ensuring beneficial experience for both students and host organisations. The University of Limerick is one of the consortium partners, including, for example, the European University Foundation and the Erasmus Student Network. We're delighted today to have Nanette Ripmeister, who is the Director at Expertise in Labour Mobility and founder of the app careerprofessor.works. And Nanette is driven, her motto that she goes by and drives her is making mobility work. She's expertise in skills development and employability in higher education, corporate and government sectors. One of Nanette's goals is making graduates internationally employable. She's over 30 years plus in international mobility. She's held key positions and was 7 years with the European Commission, EURES, streamlining labour mobility in Europe. And Nanette was appointed Industry Innovator in Residence for Study in Queensland and is author of the Cookbook on Employability. We're also delighted to have Dr. Patrice Toomey, Director of Corporate Education and Career Division in UL, Olga O'Sullivan, Corporate Education Manager with Global Programme, and Dr. Colin Caniff, Corporate Education Manager in the Science and Engineering sector in the University of Limerick as well. And just, I suppose, a note to keep in mind, and it's a note from executive as well, that we ask people not to use any AI bots during this session as well. The session will be recorded for everybody. So I'd like to welcome you all again and thank our speakers. And now I'll hand you over to the speakers. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Angela. So just covering off what we're going to look at today, we're going to explain a little bit about what the DETAS project is. And I suppose there's a number of different strands to this project. It's quite an ambitious project. So we look at just a few of those strands today. Patrice will bring us through the findings from what we know. Nanette will look at the employer section. And then finally, Colin will take us through the next steps of the project. So I suppose looking at what it is that we're talking about here, it is a European funded project. It's a very innovative and ambitious project, actually. As I say, there's a number of different elements to it. And I suppose really it's looking at three main stakeholders: the universities, the students, of course, and the employer. So it's quite an interesting project from that perspective. And to be honest, it's my first time being involved in a European project, and I've learned absolutely loads to date, just even about how things work, all of the different agencies that are out there. But this project seeks to address the growing demand for high quality traineeships across Europe. And I suppose really looking at how we prepare students, and I suppose looking at the different factors as well in that has been very, very interesting to us. The project aligns with key EU policies, such as the European Strategy for Universities, Digital Education Action Plan, and the European Year of Skills. So that's been really interesting for us as well. Why is it there? I suppose, as I said, there is a growing demand for the number of traineeships. And as I said, it is a very ambitious project. So currently there is about 75,000 students who would be facilitated under this type of project. And really the goal is to get it up to 100,000. So that is quite an ambitious target. But as I say, it does align with a lot of EU policies. So that can be, well, as I say, for myself personally, I find that very interesting, as I wasn't always aware of all of these action plans, etc. So who's involved? As Angela mentioned, we are one of a number on the consortium. So we have the Erasmus Student Network, we have the European University Foundation, the Lifelong Learning Platform. We have the expertise in labour mobility, where we have Nanette with us today, ourselves, the University of Latvia, and the University of Timisoara. So again, it's quite a diverse group, and we're all maybe coming with different expertise and maybe different lenses as well, just in terms of how this all works. So I suppose the goals of it is to upgrade the Erasmus Plus internal portal, and I'll show you what it currently looks like at the moment, because I'm not sure if everyone is aware that it exists for one or what it looks like. As we said, it is really trying to improve the support for students from pre-departure right through to on-site traineeships, and streamlining the recruitment process from the employer's perspective. For a lot of host companies, they may not be familiar with hosting interns or, particularly on a global setting. So again, just trying to facilitate them as best we can and foster youth employability and digital skills through improved platform functionality. So this is actually what the platform looks like currently. So you can see there are some resources there, and I suppose the goal is really to enhance what is already there and build on it, so that from a student's perspective, there's a lot more resources there, as well as from the employer and even the host institutions in terms of what we can bring to the table as well. So I've just put the URL link there, just in case you're not familiar with this platform. You can just maybe take a look at it in your own time. I won't bring you through it now, as we have a bit to get through. So I'll pass over to Patrice for the next section.
Thanks so much, Olga, and thanks, Angela. So yeah, the main reason that UL were invited to be partners in this consortium was really down to our own experience in deploying a significant international work placement program. So we've been doing it for 50 years now. It's as old as the co-op program itself. So we were global from the get-go. And it's a large program in many senses. In terms of scale, so about 300 of our students pack their bags and do an international placement every year, but also in terms of its disciplinary reach. So we have students from science, engineering, business, arts, humanities, and social science programs going on global placement. So it's not the preserve of language students.
Oh, yeah. Patrice, sorry,
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, the presentation has gone off screen.
That's okay, Angela, that's on purpose.
Okay,
Right.
oh, there, beg your pardon.
It's only, I'm only talking through it. It's not PowerPoint, yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah, so, I guess that what I'm saying about the disciplinary reach is that it's not the preserve, the international placement program isn't the preserve of language programs or programs with an international title. So, and that means, of course, that internationally, our sectoral coverage is also very strong. So we place students in finance, in automotive, sport, equine, pharmachem, aerospace, education, IT, law. I'm sure there are others. And then in terms of our geographic reach, we place students across all continents, and we average between 20 and 25 countries every year. The countries change every year, but that's the kind of scale of it. It's also a centralized model whereby we secure the placements for the students, and it's a non-reciprocal model. So we don't engage in or exchange arrangements with other universities for the purpose of international placement. So as practitioners, and I'm sure I speak for many here, we have a lot of practical experience of placing students, preparing students, and supporting students on international work placement. But for this project, for the DETAS project, our first task was actually to apply a scholarly lens to the practice of international work placement. So we did that by reviewing the academic literature. And that was really interesting. There was actually a lot more work in it than we had thought, because while there is a lot of research on work placements per se, we're probably all aware of that, international work placement actually receives much less attention in the academic discourse, which, for me, was surprising, given that, as practitioners, we hear so much about globalization and the globalized workforce and the rise of global competencies. But anyway, there you go. So we're all familiar, I'm assuming, with the benefits of work placement. I'm not going to go over that because they're very well documented. But the literature review, this DETAS literature review, certainly speaks to benefits that are more specific to international work placement. So in overall terms, it tells us that the benefits of regular work placement are amplified when they're undertaken in an international context, which makes perfect sense, of course. because it forces students really to deal head on with really high levels of uncertainty, of complexity, and straightforward disruption. And we also know that that's where learning is located for the most part, because it tests all of their kind of existing kind of assumptions and skills in a totally new situation. And not just in the workplace, but also outside of the workplace. So we know ourselves that successful international placements really demand of students to kind of flex into their more curious, adaptable, empathetic, and kind of resilient versions of themselves. So international placement at the same time isn't kind of a Pollyanna world. We know that. Though we know that the research tells us that international work placement is associated with increased confidence, appreciation of difference, development of innovative practices, and kind of a general sensitivity around cultural and language issues. And these are things that we may know intuitively or anecdotally as practitioners. But I guess the purpose of this literature review is to test these assumptions evidentially. It's also good for us because if we're making cases for resourcing of, kind of initiatives like that, it's very good for us higher education practitioners to be able to reach for the supporting evidence. So employers too recognise the value of international work placement. The kind of literature reports that students who undertake international placements are far more likely to be perceived as being confident and assertive by employers. And so it has this, if you like, a kind of a symbolic value that conveys a proven ability to employers. And that's regardless of students' motivation. So whether they do it to gain an advantage in the graduate employment market, or they're interested in self-discovery, which lots of our students are, or just that they have a desire to kind of experience a certain novelty. And the literature also tells us that international work placements can accelerate students' career readiness. We know too from the literature that students themselves rate the experience as adding much or extreme value to their future career prospects. So kind of kudos all around there. But I would say this on a word of caution, because employers also report that, and it won't come as a surprise to you, but that the perceived value of international work placement is predicated on students' ability to effectively articulate that experience. So that's something that we all need to bear in mind. So we know it's difficult for students. It's difficult for them to move from the classroom in one country to the workplace in another. It's hard for them to make that kind of identity switch, from student to their pre-professional self, and to do that in a context of a different culture, a different language often, and a different lifestyle. And like these realities are widely addressed in the literature review. And then there are other challenges like fear of separation from family and friends, homesickness, lack of language skills, financial resources. And maybe this is more relevant for the post-COVID world, I don't know, but a kind of a generally lower risk tolerance amongst our student populations. Now, a very obvious challenge for some students, though it wouldn't have come through for us because we operate kind of a different system, but was a low awareness of international placement opportunities. And that is something that the DETAS project is specifically seeking to address. So we did the literature review, but we also triangulated the literature review findings with student focus groups across Europe. And there was a lot of correlation there, which is kind of reassuring. Lots of positive feedback on things like skills development, opportunities to travel at the weekend, self-discovery. And like one student said something like, I actually can't remember what I was like as a student back then. I have such a different outlook now. So it kind of captures that development arc so succinctly, I think. But students also mention things like very specific things like accommodation, tax status, legal status, recognition of qualifications, not necessarily the higher education qualifications, but more around things like safe paths for students working in the construction sector, for example, and its transferability. It's not transferable as it happens. And then there seemed to be huge variation as well in the quality of placement preparation, support during placement, and post-placement reflection and follow-up by universities. So students across Europe there was a lot of commonality there amongst the students. Likewise, the students also reported a lot of variation in the quality of induction and supervisor from their employers. And this kind of brings us nicely to the voice of the employer. We are very conscious of this key stakeholder, because without whom really the students would never have an opportunity to undertake an international placement. And a key strand of the DETAS project is to listen to that voice of the employer. So it's my very great pleasure to hand you over to Nanette, who's going to share the results of a very large survey of European employers that was undertaken by Annette and her team. So over to you, Nanette.
Thanks very much. This was a perfect introduction to well, what we have been talking about so far in the DETAS project. A little bit, who am I? Well, I'm Nanette Ripmeester. I'm Dutch. I'm based in Rotterdam. I work for an organization called Expertise in Labor Mobility, which I founded over 30 years ago. If I say it like that, it feels like extremely long, but it's been a great journey so far. And what we do, we work very much with higher education institutions, but also with employers. And that's an interesting combination to have both of those there. And in the Erasmus Plus projects that we've been involved, Erasmus Jobs, Erasmus Skills, Erasmus Careers, and now DETAS. That role, that connection to the employer world of work is an important one. Some of you might have heard about the International Student Barometer. I'm responsible for continental Europe and North America with my team for the International Student Barometer. And last but certainly not least, we've developed an app called careerprofessor.works, which is, I think, a nice way of gamifying information around careers in different countries and helping all of you know your careers advisor. So you all know all the questions that you get. And well, one of the questions we constantly got was, how does a CV look in country X, country Z, whatever? And I never wanted to give them a model, because I think CV should be a reflection of you and not a standard model. But okay, we have them in Career Professor. We have them for all the different countries, because that is what the students would like to see. But we've tried to do it in such a way that we help them understand why it's different in a particular country. Can I push the buttons myself, or does somebody need to do that? Olga, do you? Yeah, perfect. Oh, Olga, then I'll just sort of wave at you occasionally or say something. So
Perfect.
Perfect. So to DETAS, digitalizing Erasmus traineeship application and support. If it's a European project, you straight away come across an issue, because in my home country, the Netherlands, we would never call it a traineeship, but an internship. But well, that doesn't go down so well in the name. So you already have, if it's international, you know that you have to deal with those kind of differences. So if we talk about, let's call it traineeship for the purpose of this sort of gathering, but we had to do an employer survey. And if you're familiar with Erasmus Plus project, you have key performance indicators. And when I saw the key performance indicator for this one, it was 250 responses from different employers. I was a little bit in shock, because that is quite a lot for a survey amongst employers, but we made it. We even had 265 responses from 38 countries. So that was great. The vast majority, 69% of them, was directly responsible for interns, and over 80% are either hosting or planning to host an Erasmus Plus trainee. And all sizes of companies, employers are represented in the institutions. Yes, and so if we look at what I thought was a really nice one, we asked them, how do you recruit those trainees? And well, university career platforms rank very high. And I have to say, when for our company, and we don't do huge amounts, but we usually have 1 or 2 interns, and we always go through university platforms. But I thought that's because we have a clear connection to them. But no, we're certainly not the only employer. LinkedIn, Indeed, Erasmus Intern are the most commonly mentioned ones, so the job boards. But the career platforms from the university rank pretty high, as second highest. And then social media, of course, a growing tool in that sense. And if we look at the next slide, we will see the numbers there. I thought it's handy to explain in words and then also show you this, how it looks. And you can indeed see the university career platforms is the second most important one. On the next slide, we will see the compensation, because what do you do if you get an international intern in your company, an international trainee in your company? How do you compensate them? As a Dutch employer, we always used to provide compensation until at some point we got a Chinese intern, so somebody from outside the EU, and our salary compensation a person said, oh, wait, we can't just provide a compensation for somebody outside of the EU. Oh, that sort of made things a little bit more difficult. And what are you going to do then as an employer? If you're a large employer, you probably will know all these laws by heart, we thought. But it's not that clear for major employers either. And, well, a lot of the recruitment is not by major employers. Most people don't work for a multinational employer. 60% of the population works more or less for small and medium-sized organizations. So what was nice to see with the compensation for internships and traineeships, that the vast majority said it's unpaid, but we do combine some kind of compensation. So unpaid sounds a bit harsh, but it's very often that they do get certain things, but like really commission-based salaries. We asked it out because we thought we should ask all possible ways of rewarding people, but that is not a very often used way. And we can see on the next slide the exact numbers. So commission-based, it's not non-existent, but it's not very big. I would think it's a very weird one to have a trainee on a commission base, on an hourly base, but okay. So vast majority said unpaid, but what a lot of them said is intern allowance and academic credit, and they can select all that apply. So we thought to ourselves that it's for most people will get something in return. And there's of course a whole debate going on, not just in Europe, but also outside of Europe. Do we need to pay our interns? I think I'm just looking at Patrice, but just ignoring me here. I know Patrice would be a fierce fighter for, yes, get them paid. And I agree with her. But as an employer, I've come across issues where it was sometimes more difficult. But I think certainly within Europe, let's have some basis there, and let's make sure that we help employers to provide them with some guidelines at what is common to give to an international intern. And for sure, I would say at least an internship allowance. And on the next slide, we'll see what was the most challenging phase, because for us, it was interesting to know, where do employers encounter issues and what kind of issues do they encounter? The onboarding phase was by far the phase that caused the most issues for employers, but also halfway through they had some issues. But let's look at what they mentioned as the most on the next slide as the most challenging ones in the onboarding and first stages. And that is something where universities come in, because the most common challenge was technical skills gap. Students not having the right kind of knowledge. And next, both of them at 32%, as mentioned by employers, adapting to a company's work environment. And I don't think it's that strange. As Patrice already mentioned in her talk about the literature review, you take people and you move them to another culture. They go in a very important phase in their life, from being a student into being becoming their professional self. I think that is very triggering already. And then you're also in another country, in another culture, and you have to adapt to the company culture. I notice in our organization, and over the 30 years, I've seen many, many interns with our organization, they struggle tremendously with, well, pre-COVID, it was 5 days a week in the office. Now we're a bit more flexible there, but the 5 days in the office, that was so difficult, and it was all kind of things. And Patrice mentioned the difference between, or a possible difference between COVID and non-COVID. I don't know about yourself, but I definitely see a difference in young people there. And one of the things I noticed, which I always find a rather funny one, because I just try to imagine how that then happened when you were young and at home, that people now post-COVID, we can say, okay, they've missed out certain skills, social skills that you get when you meet other people. But what they don't do whenever they come here as a new intern is close the door behind them. They don't close the door behind them when they go to the restroom. They don't close the door when they come into the office. They occasionally even leave the door to the street open. I'm just thinking, like, how? But okay, so yes, adapting to company and work situations is really a difficult one for people. It was also difficult to understand how to integrate in a team and lack of clarity in roles and responsibilities. And when we looked at the open comments, we also saw open comments there where employers, for instance, say, yeah, we're busy. We don't have the time to constantly explain what they have to do. But at some point, somebody needs to explain to a student what they have to do, because that is a key one, of course. What was slightly less common were cultural differences and communication barriers, but I think they're key to get them right. And this is also something where I think in the preparation, universities can play a big role. If we look at the next slide, we'll just see the challenges there as they were mentioned, and think also about feedback response. Just if somebody asks you something, getting back, meeting performance expectations. Wow, that is a real difficult one for students, because they've for trainees, because they've moved from this student where it was pretty clear what was expected to suddenly, without too much guidance, having to understand what's required from you. And that is not an easy one. If we look at the next slide, we have some additional comments of the employers, and lots of them were around visas and administrative procedures. We have taken the comments as they come, so including typos in there, but accommodation was mentioned by a lot of the employers also as a difficult one for students. And if I look at something like this, I think with a European Commission funded project, here is something that we definitely have to work on. Okay, we're not going to solve the problems around accommodation. That is way too complicated. But we should be able to solve some of the problems around visa issues and sort that in a way that it's more clear what is required if you want to do a traineeship in another country. Because to be frank, a lot of the employers had no clue. And it was irrespective of size, but they just didn't know so much how to deal with it. If we then move all the way to the end of the placement in the exit interviews in the next slide. So we skip the in-between period, but if we go to the end of it, and what was an interesting one during that phase, that in-between phase, lots of employers mentioned that midway, to keep the enthusiasm for the placement, to keep sure that students were, that trainees were still enjoying what they were doing. And it was quite funny when we got those results back and we started analyzing them. Just a week before, I'd said to somebody in my team, I said, you know what I find the most challenging period whenever we deal with an intern is we do internship for 5 months. So the first 2 to 3 months, it's really the honeymoon period and everything goes great. But then towards the beginning of a mid month 3, it's no longer exciting. It's no longer new. It is getting a bit boring. You have to show up at your work, you have to do tasks. And I noticed that the trainees at that point very often sort of have a little bit of a dip. And that was exactly what came out of the survey that we did. I'll talk a bit later about what we're doing with the survey to make sure why we've done the survey. But the end of the placement, the exit interview, is an important one for students, because I think at that very moment, as an employer, you can help a student understand what it is that they've learned, what it is that will make them grow, and what will be the value that they carry into their next phase. So here I think is an important part for companies to sort of get them ready when they go back to you. And I would love all careers advisory services across the world to also do something with students coming back, because we do a lot in preparation, but we very often, I don't know if this goes for all of you, but we very often just get them back and that's it. Whereas if they come back after their traineeship and you make them reflect on what they've learned, that's exactly where the learning kicks in, and where we can move from, oh, it was fun, to a more insightful comment if somebody asked the trainee what they've gained when they were abroad. If we look at the next slide, we'll see very clearly that most of the people do an exit interview. I was almost surprised to see that there's almost 45% or 25% that still doesn't do an exit interview. And when they do exit interview, they talk about future plans and aspirations, suggestions for improving the internship. I thought that was pretty brave of the employers to also ask it, because I've come across some very critical interns who were very outspoken on their things. So I think it's brave from employers to ask those things. But overall, it's about the intern in the traineeship experience. And what are we going to do with all of this? Because it's, of course, nice that 265 employers have answered the survey, but we're using it to create an employer toolkit where and I don't have anything here from the toolkit because it's still in development, and we've tested it on a recent a meeting where Colm, Olga and Patrice were also present, and some employers, because what we have been doing, we have for each of the areas where there's an issue, we've created a toolkit with tools for employers to support them, not telling employers what to do, because I don't think that's going to work with employers, but by helping them to understand, okay, if you are noticing this drop halfway through the internship, what can you do to lift the spirits again of the student? So we have created some tools that they can use there. If they come to your organization, what are the things you can do? And one of the things we created was an email, and it was interesting because what I always do when a new intern arrives, I email the intern and I have the rest of the staff in the CC. What we created as a tool, and that was one of my team, Melanie, who came up with that, let's do it the other way around. Let's send an email to the team and with the intern in the CC. So we make the intern feel welcome in a different way by paying more attention to the team. And I have to say, we tried it out with a new intern just 3 weeks ago. And I have to say, it worked. And it worked on a very interesting way, because she was like, oh, yeah, I'm really part of a team now. So let's hope that the toolkit will work out pretty well. We keep you posted when everything is ready. But there's also some other research I want to share with you. And I have 2 researchers I want to share. This one is about a Canadian project where we looked into Canadian employers and what they value about students who study abroad. Well, we identified 5 top skills. I don't think they come as a surprise to any of you. Communication, adaptability, problem solving, teamwork, time and self-management. But what was super interesting, and this relates back to what Patrice was saying, the employer said like, we don't value international experience a lot. That was a little bit of a shock when they said that, but they said in the next sentence, it were half-structured interviews. So I could sort of find out what was the reason behind it. They said, we only value it if somebody is able to tell us what they've learned. So if we understand what they can bring to the organization, to the placement that they're going to be taking part in. And if we look at the next slide, this is another project that we worked on, an Erasmus Plus project. Information of the, I've put the slides there because you can, of the sources there, because you can find those resources already. They're out in the open. Here we created an employer manual, different from the toolkit that we've been doing, but we did different parts of research. We looked at skills that students think they learn and skills that employers think they learn. And if you remember what I just said about the Canadian one, you see a high overlap because here the employers said adaptability, teamwork, creative thinking, communication, and self-efficacy. That is what they value most when people have been abroad. But the Erasmus Careers Project did something else. We looked at the value of having an Erasmus Plus experience on your CV and within your letter. And it was quite a shock when the research came back because and it was over 2,000 CVs that we sent out. So it was a pretty big survey. But what turned out, employers don't value international experience at all. So we were like, oh, well, okay, so we can all pack up and go home after this. Luckily, we did a little bit more research, and that showed, similar to what the Canadian employers have been saying, no, we love people who went abroad, but only if they can showcase to us what it is that they've learned. Otherwise, we don't see the value. So on those words, I'll hand it back to, I think, Olga, because I think interesting information and things to work on. Yeah, because we want people to make the next step.
It's over to you.
Great, thanks Olga. If you want to move the slide along there, please. Okay, so just very briefly, in terms of the 3 key phases of this project, we have it set out in 2024, 25 and 26. So the first set was a needs analysis, research and stakeholder consultations. This year we're looking at the implementation of those innovations on erasmus.org, and we're developing guidelines for universities. And then next year, 2026, the release of the upgraded platform, advocacy efforts and policy recommendations. So just in terms of a little bit of detail on what we've done. So we've heard from the student and the employer perspectives. So from the student perspective, we looked at the desk-based research, data collection, and the student focus groups, as Patrice spoke about. The results of the employer survey have been presented by Nanette here today, giving that employer perspective. And now in the next step, we need to look at the university perspective. So to understand the role of universities in quality traineeship placements, so our next steps or tasks essentially will include an institutional survey for sending organisations. We'll be conducting some research focus groups, these will be virtual, with universities. Of course, reports on the support of universities in traineeship processes, that's for before, during and after student mobilities. Developing some guidelines for universities to road test. Piloting of these support tools with universities at their institutional level. Development of some case studies around those support mechanisms and follow-ups. And then, of course, analysing the requirements and the need for technical solutions to connect institutions to the erasmusintern.org. So the survey, if you want to move along to the next slide, Olga, thanks. We are looking for your support in this. So the survey is the Erasmus Plus and international traineeship practices at higher education institutions. And the purpose really is to explore how higher education institutions support students in securing and succeeding in their international traineeships. In this survey, we're going to look at institutional information, some student mobility data, that is, how many students at your institution have participated in the Erasmus Plus programme in the last academic year. We'll be asking you questions around traineeship practices, institutional support and engagement, evaluation and feedback processes, benefits and challenges, and your general knowledge of erasmusintern.org, the portal. But I guess Olga has shown you the screenshot earlier on in the presentation, so you'll be ticking yes to that box in the survey, hopefully. And of course, we'll be looking for any other comments and information from you. So in terms of your next steps, the community on this call today are the experts in the area that we're surveying at the moment. So we'd very much welcome your participation in supporting this research by completing the survey on screen. It's linked there, and we'll be sending out notifications as well afterwards. And we'd really love if you would participate in some of the focus groups as well. And I hand back to Olga.
Perfect. Thanks very much, everyone. We're open to questions if anyone has any particular questions they'd like to ask or areas maybe they'd need clarification on.
Great, thanks a million. Sorry, Patrice, I just saw your hand going up there.
Oh, sorry, I thought you were going somebody else. Sorry there, Angela. Yeah, there were two comments really. So back to Nanette's, the feedback from employers regarding the value of Erasmus study placement, and to a certain extent it also applies to work placement. But so I did some research with that with a US colleague, and we looked at that with quite a few European employers, and the feedback that we had was that employers like to see evidence of students being discommoded and getting through it. So the employer, so for example, the employer for Erasmus study, they differentiated between optional Erasmus and compulsory. So a student who's doing an optional Erasmus, they would see more value in that because they feel that the student had to get up and go and do something that wasn't kind of within the program structure. And but they also said that, so all that thing about evidencing, yeah, that came through very strongly. But this the employers were also, you know, they kind of said that, so if you had a student whose parent was in, for example, the Defence Forces, and they had to move around a lot, they would see that as evidence of discommoding, and they would attach an equal value to it. But that was interesting. It's all about the discommoding of the student and how they got through it. And just one other thing, you were talking about paid placements. Of course, we always agitate for paid placements. We do live in the real world. Our institution colleagues don't always live in the real world. So that is not fully appreciated. And sitting there in that awkward nexus can be very hard, because you literally have colleagues saying, well, I think they should be paid. Well, I don't disagree. So, but that's something that can be quite burdensome for us, because you feel like, yes, this is an external labour market environment that operates completely independently of any of us here on this call. But that's not always fully appreciated, or there's not enough curiosity about it sometimes in our institutions. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Patrice. Just wondering if any of the audience have questions they'd like to turn on their camera and ask the questions, or if you want to put it in the chat, I can read it out. Maybe while we're waiting, just one question, I suppose, to the panel is, what's the role of the careers advisors when it comes to supporting the interns?
I can take this if people are okay with that.
Yeah.
I suppose there's I suppose that maybe sometimes a misalignment with the expectation from the employer versus, I suppose, the reality of what we can do as careers advisors. I think Nanette even mentioned it there, that I suppose even the challenge for a student going into a work placement and not having the digital skills, for example, Excel being a big one. We hear it every year. We do tell the students, we ask them to prepare, and yet the feedback we get back from employers will be, oh, well, they didn't have great Excel skills, etc. But I do think there is, I suppose, there is an onus on us in terms of, I suppose, the pre-departure preparation for students. And it is maybe even just trying to prepare them for, even the most well-traveled student is going to struggle. So, you know, they might think, oh, sure, I've been away loads of times, but actually moving away to work is very different than when you just pack your bags and go traveling yourself. So there is, I suppose there are elements that we can help with and we should help with, but we don't have the answer to everything either, I would say.
Yeah. Thanks, Olga. I just see Paula there has a question. Thanks, Paula.
Hi, good afternoon, Angela, and thank you very much to Olga and Nanette and Patrice and Colm. That was really interesting and very informative. I have two questions. One is, in my experience, students set out at the beginning of the year or the year before their placement saying, oh, you know, I really want to go to France or America or Canada or somewhere. And by the time it comes along, that enthusiasm has gone, it's gone out the window, it's over and done with. It's very hard to keep the momentum up. So I'm wondering, has anybody got any hints or tips on incentivizing students to follow their dream, pursue their goal, and go on an international placement? Because I totally agree. I'm not surprised by your research, because I've often heard it said, you know, that a degree is great. It's a great privilege to have one. A degree with a study abroad is wonderful, but a degree with an internship, an international internship, is really the cream of the whole thing. So that's my first question. And my second is, what does the during internship support look like? What's the typical support from the HEI to the student? What does that look like?
Well, can I just in response to your first question, what was it again, just specifically? Sorry, just
It's about the momentum of students. Will say they get caught up on the idea, but
correct. So it's like that thing where the aspiration hits the rubber of the, you know, of the reality. So you're always going to have a larger cohort, a larger pool, and they will be funneled. It's the way that you funnel that, I suppose. You manage that funneling, because that's a self-selection thing. You don't want to lose them, I get that, but nor do you want to be sending students out in placement who are wholly unsuited to it. So for us, like, we have a screening system for the students. In some ways, it makes them think more seriously about it. So they have to meet with people. We put them through scenarios. They meet with our own staff. They have to, you know, they're put through their paces on scenarios and challenges around how they will cope with it. Say, simple example, what would you do if you're the only student in Frankfurt? So that's not going to be an issue, you know, further down the road. And that has been very good for us. So for the students who kind of get to that stage, we tend to keep them. But there's always that thing, aspiration versus reality. Because I know that at some point we did some research on it, and 80% of our final year students said that they would like to work internationally. But like, it was very aspirational, because we know that it's not that. Even the inverse isn't true. Not even 20% of them don't work internationally. So I think that is a thing of kind of carefully managing the larger pool of aspiration students to ensure that you're getting a pool of students who are actually very ready and willing. And sometimes that it does concentrate their minds if they have to go through the screening process, because there's a step between the aspiration and the actual sending out of the CV. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but even to incentivize them, or to get the student to consider an international internship, even the pre-step to the screening, how does that work in different HEIs?
I don't want the UL scenario to dominate the the discussion there. So maybe somebody else wants to come in there. Sorry, Paula, we'd be happy to say what we do, but maybe I don't want to dominate proceedings.
I know Nanette has her hand up there. I don't know, are you kind of answering to Paula's question as well?
Well, it was not really so much Paula's question, but it was interlining with that, because also the employers say that in the beginning, one of the main things that they encounter next to visa is people not showing up. So people have gone through the beginning of it, and then when they were selected, that they're not coming. So yes, there is something that we have to make sure that we funnel them through in a great way. And I like what you said, Patrice. If you make them think about it very, very seriously, like this is not just a fun thing. This is really, it is a fun thing, but there's also some serious things to it. And I always think that if we can show them that there is what the ROI, the return on investment is for them, is that it will help them in trying to look for work.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Nanette.
And I think, Paula, just to your point, I suppose we would have similar experiences in terms of like a group of friends thinking all 6 of them are going to be placed in the same place in the same town. And it is maybe just bringing things back to the reality of, well, you know, we can't make an employer take all 6 of you together. So they're kind of maybe getting into that mindset of, you know, the reality of it, so that maybe that's why I suppose the momentum is kept, because they know what to expect, I guess.
Okay, thank you.
Just a second question there, Paula. The supports during placement. That's what we're hoping to establish with the survey. So there are some questions we're trying to establish. What are the key issues first of all? So in terms of students' adjustment to living in a foreign country on their placement, what challenges do they typically face when participating in an international placement? That could be financial, language, cultural, homesickness. And I guess once we capture the challenges, then we can figure out the supports that might be required during, and that'll feed into the platform.
Right, thanks, Colin.
Well, we do know, all right, that students have kind of this sense that if they're not contacted by their academic advisor during their placement, some of ours are actually get a physical in-person visit, but not all of them.
Yeah.
And they really react to that out of sight, out of mind. And they just say, oh, so you've got, you know, you're off campus.
Yeah.
That's it. That's what we think, and you know, we'll deal with you when you come back on campus again. But particularly so if they know that other students have been visited or have had that contact with their academic supervisor. We get a lot of feedback on that, don't we?
Yeah.
A lot of students get very exercised about it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I hear that even if whether it's international or not, Patrice, as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
It is like out of sight. They do feel they're forgotten about, and yet they're in their minds they're still very much connected to the college, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Same with us. Yeah, for Irish placements. Yeah.
Just wondering, sorry, Olga, were you going to ask something there? Orla.
Yeah, no, I was just going to ask a question, because now I'm not long, I'm just about two years in this role. So the Erasmus office kind of operates on a separate basis, and I wouldn't necessarily see them before they actually go on their placement. And I just wonder as well about the survey that you have there. I think it would be very useful for our Erasmus person to have sight of. So it would be great to get that. So I think that I would like to work a bit more closely with the Erasmus person and see if there is any way of maybe preparing the students, you know, expectation wise and that kind of skills wise, resilience wise, you know, before they go out, because I have no sight of them before they go. So is that normal within a university? Would that be a normal kind of thing in a university, that there wouldn't be much communication between the two?
So Orla, maybe I can speak to the UL piece on that,
Yeah.
and we'd be more than happy for you to share the survey when we distribute it with your colleagues, because the more
Great.
participants, the more rich the data set will be for us. Within UL here, we actually work quite closely with our UL global colleagues, because I suppose the Erasmus, I'm going to look at it from the Erasmus Plus recognition and funding piece. That's one singular project, but that encapsulates the study mobilities and the traineeship mobilities. So
Okay.
we fund the traineeship strand, and UL Global funds the study strand. So we'd work closely because it's a single contract down to the HEI from the national agent. But when we receive the contracts, we separate it between the two offices, but we still have to deliver on the contractual obligations within that. So we do
Yes.
have to work closely with them, and then the students are supported through the recognition and funding process as well. But we disperse that to the students from our office.
Yeah. Okay.
It was interesting actually, Orla, when we were first approached to join the consortium, I was trying to manage their expectation. I was saying, we don't have an off the shelf. We do a lot for preparation. I think we have a lot of best practice in our preparation, but I said it's not an off the shelf product that can just be deployed to any institution. And he said, no, what you forget is that in most institutions, the extent of the students' interactions with the office is that they simply get the form and get their academics to sign it. So
Yeah.
their contract form. So that was kind of a little bit, that was news to me. But yes, that's the way, of course, and a lot of that's structural. I get that, Orla. But I think it would be
Yeah.
great if you involved your Erasmus colleagues in it. That'd be great.
Yeah, I
Thanks.
just wondered to what extent, universities would normally be dealing with the Erasmus office, but maybe it is normal practice. Yeah. So how does it work in Waterford, Angela?
Yeah, the international office, there's an Erasmus person in Waterford, and they deal with them. And it's very much like Patrice said, sometimes it's just they're getting their forms, and it can very much vary, and they might come to us because of a concern, and then I'm kind of chasing it up. So it can very much vary. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm just thinking, just before we finish, thanks, Orla, there's a question there. I don't know, Donna, do you want to ask the question yourself, or do you want me to read it out for you? Donna was just saying, we found that in recent years it has become more difficult for our students to secure an internship in Spain or France. Have other institutions had similar experiences?
Angela, do you know where Donna is based by any chance?
No, Donna hasn't a mic on. Sorry, her mic isn't working, so I'm asking. I'm not too sure where Donna is. Even Donna, if you want to put in the chat where you're situated. Oh, in Queens. Queens.
We've had, I suppose, feedback since Brexit that it is, I suppose it is difficult for employers just in terms of the red tape. And I know Nanette kind of alluded to it as well, just in terms of taking on a non-EU, intern. So yeah, that is feedback that we get from employers just in terms of, I suppose, they're navigating around the requirement for a visa, etc.
Okay, so we're just 2 minutes to 2 there. So unless there's any more questions, I just want to thank all our speakers. Very informative, very interesting. And yeah, I think we'll all benefit from the results of this. So we're happy to share. And I think because every institution works differently, I think just to share with our international offices, our Erasmus people would be very informative as well. So there's lots of nice comments coming in, a great session. So thank you all very much. And looking forward to seeing you at the next Lunch and Learn. And thanks to Caroline for organising it, and also for our guest speakers. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care.